Hi, I'm Rowena. At Christmas dinner, my mom stood up, smiled sweetly, and told me I wasn't family anymore. I stayed quiet, but what they didn't know was that I had brought a gift that would tear their world apart, because the real betrayal had been building for years, quiet, hidden, and tonight, it would finally explode. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening? And where are you from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your story too. The afternoon sunlight slipped through the frost-covered windows of my small apartment, turning everything a muted, almost ghostly gray. It was just after 3 when my phone buzzed on the counter. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked it up, expecting a routine work email or maybe an automated bank alert. Instead, there it was, a text from my mother. Christmas dinner, 6 p.m., bring dessert if you want. No greeting, no warmth, not even a question mark. It read like a notice, not an invitation. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, as if willing the words to rearrange themselves into something softer, something resembling affection. But they stayed cold and sharp, slicing through my chest with the precision of a scalpel. Another part of me, the part that had finally started believing I deserved better, whispered that maybe I should just delete it, ignore it, move on. But old habits? They sink their roots deep. I found myself scrolling through memories of Christmases past. Nights I had poured everything into decorating their house, wrapping gifts perfectly, baking pies from scratch. All the while, feeling like an outsider peeking in through frosted windows. Maybe this year will be different, I thought, ridiculous hope curling its tendrils around my heart like smoke. Without thinking too hard, I typed back, "I'll be there." And just like that, I was shackled again. The cold bit through my coat as I pulled into their driveway at 6 sharp, the sky a dark velvet scattered with icy stars. Cars lined the street, a sure sign that the house was packed. From inside, I heard the low hum of laughter, the clink of glasses, the familiar creak of the floorboards under too many feet. I hesitated for a moment, one hand on the steering wheel, breathing in the silence of my car. Then I stepped out, gathering my homemade pecan pie from the passenger seat, the dessert if you want, I'd stubbornly decided to bring anyway, and trudged up the walkway. The front door was ajar, festive music spilling out like forced cheer. Nobody was at the door to greet me. No one called out, "Merry Christmas, Rowena," like they used to when we were all younger and still pretending. I stepped inside, brushing snow off my boots and smoothing my hair. Not one head turned. My mother glanced up briefly from the kitchen, gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, and returned to carving the roast. Shanna caught my gaze from across the room and gave a grin so rehearsed it could have won her a role in a toothpaste commercial. No one else even bothered. The living room was a hive of conversation and laughter, none of it touching me. I was standing in the middle of my childhood home, yet I might as well have been invisible. I set the pie on the kitchen counter, no one offered to help or even looked, and quietly made my way to the edge of the gathering, perching awkwardly on the arm of a sofa. They had managed without me just fine, it seemed. It was Maura's voice that finally drew my attention back into the room. Loud enough for half the house to hear, she cackled to someone. "You know, it's been so much easier organizing everything this year. No control freak micromanaging every little thing." I froze. A few chuckles answered her. Low, mean. The blood drained from my face, but I kept my posture casual as if her words had floated right past me. But inside, the weight of it slammed into my ribs. That wasn't an offhand comment. That was deliberate. I hadn't simply been forgotten from the preparations this year. I had been excluded, on purpose. My chest tightened as I watched Maura clink glasses with Shanna, the two of them laughing like schoolgirls getting away with something wicked. Mom passed by me then, carrying a platter of ham, not even sparing me a glance. I pressed my hands together, willing them not to shake. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't invited tonight because they missed me. I was tolerated, like an old ghost haunting the halls they couldn't quite get rid of yet. I inhaled deeply, the scent of pine and roast beef clashing in the air, thick and suffocating. "Why do you keep trying?" the voice inside asked. Why are you still here? For years, I had told myself that if I just loved them harder, tried harder, gave more, they'd see me. They'd value me. Tonight, standing alone in a room full of people I once would have called family, I realized the brutal, simple truth. They didn't want me. Not really. Not unless they needed something. And for the first time, the thought didn't crush me. It freed me. Still holding my coat, I tried to smile, tried to pretend it didn't sting. I found an empty hook near the door and hung it up carefully, as if the simple act of placing my coat just right could steady the unraveling inside me. For a moment, I stood there, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from my dress, pretending I had somewhere important to be, someone waiting for me just beyond the door. The living room buzzed with conversations that flowed around me like I was a piece of furniture, inoffensive, invisible. I moved toward the dining area, the scent of overcooked turkey and cinnamon candles clinging heavily to the air. The table was already half cleared, plates pushed aside, silverware abandoned mid-gesture. Laughter rang out from the kitchen where Maura and Shanna hovered over a half-finished cheesecake, gossiping like teenagers. There was no seat saved for me, no plate waiting. I hovered awkwardly for a second too long before pulling out a chair at the far end of the table. I settled in silently, ignoring the crumb-covered tablecloth and the stale, cooling food on the platters. I folded my hands in my lap, willing my body to relax, but it was like sitting inside a pressure cooker. Every movement, every scrape of a fork, every giggle felt magnified, as if the walls themselves were pushing me out. Moments later, Mom called out from across the kitchen, her voice syrupy sweet but loud enough for everyone to hear. "And of course," she trilled, lifting a glass of cheap red wine. "We're so grateful Rowena offered to cover the Christmas expenses this year. Such a generous heart." My head snapped up. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Shanna turned, smiling wickedly. "Yeah, Rowena's just full of Christmas spirit," she chimed in, clapping her hands slowly, mockingly. Maura let out a soft snort, covering it with a cough. Heat flooded my face. I tried to swallow, but my mouth had gone dry. No one had asked me. No one had even hinted. It wasn't a request. It was an ambush. And now, with all eyes on me, with all these fake, expectant smiles waiting for my gracious acceptance, the trap snapped shut. I forced a tight smile and lifted my glass half an inch off the table, pretending to toast along. The burn in my chest wasn't from the cheap wine. It was the humiliation. The realization that, once again, I wasn't family to them. I was a wallet with legs. A few half-hearted cheers went up around the room, quickly swallowed by more laughter and chatter as they moved on, comfortable in the assumption that I would play along like I always did. I picked at the cold green beans on my plate, my appetite dead. Memory after memory tumbled into my mind. The Thanksgiving where I quietly paid off Maura's rent so she wouldn't get evicted. The summer trip Shanna took, on her own dime, after I'd covered her final tuition bill. The emergency dentist appointment Dad needed that somehow turned into my new credit card balance. I hadn't just been generous, I had been a convenience, an expectation. I tightened my grip on the fork until my knuckles whitened. The anger simmered beneath my ribs, slow and deliberate, no longer the fiery burst of outrage, but something far more dangerous, a clarity sharpening into resolve. They didn't love me, they didn't even like me. They used me, and somehow for years I'd let them. I set down my fork gently, careful not to make a sound. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Across the table, Shanna winked at Maura, who smirked back, both so smug, so sure of their victory. I smiled, for real this time, because they had no idea. None of them did. This was the last Christmas they would ever get anything from me. No more checks, no more last-minute rescues, no more pretending. I folded my napkin slowly, smoothing the edges with precision. Inside my mind, I wasn't sitting at that battered dining table anymore. I was already elsewhere, drawing up the borders they would never again be allowed to cross. There was no need to make a scene, no angry declarations, no tears. They'd made their choices. Now, finally, so would I. I lifted my glass one more time in a silent toast to myself, a small, private rebellion. No one noticed. And that, I realized, made it even sweeter. As the evening stumbled along, filled with forced laughter and cheap recycled jokes, I stayed quiet, observing the people who had once been my entire world and now felt like strangers renting out my past. The longer I sat there, the lighter I felt, like the invisible weights I'd carried all my life were finally sliding off, one by one. It wasn't just about the money. It never had been. It was about the expectation, the entitlement, that my life, my success, my sacrifices belonged to them. Not anymore. They thought they could shame me into silence, trap me with guilt. But guilt only works when you believe you owe someone something. And tonight, for the first time, I saw the truth clearly. I owed them nothing. The glass in my hand felt heavier with every second that ticked by. I lowered it to the table carefully, aligning it with the edge of my plate as if precision could somehow mask the tremor crawling up my spine. All around me, the room buzzed with forced merriment, conversations spinning like wheels stuck in the same muddy ruts. I set down my fork, my appetite gone, my mind sharpening like a blade. The scrape of utensils against chipped plates filled the room, a background hum beneath brittle laughter. A chorus of inside jokes floated from the kitchen, laughter too loud, words too sharp, the kind that felt less about joy and more about exclusion. Mom, Celeste, was the first to strike. She dabbed her mouth delicately with a napkin, then offered a syrupy smile to no one in particular. "Some people just don't understand what sacrifice really means," she said, letting the words hover in the air like a challenge. She didn't look at me, but she didn't have to. Everyone at the table knew exactly who she meant. A ripple of knowing chuckles passed through the group. Maura leaned in closer to Shauna, whispering something that made both of them snicker behind their glasses of wine. I breathed slowly through my nose, forcing a neutral expression onto my face, but inside, something ancient and brittle cracked a little more. Mom wasn't finished. She speared a slice of ham and added with a laugh, "It must be nice not having real responsibilities. Must be nice to just drift through life." This time, Shanna didn't even try to hide her smirk. My fingers tightened around the edge of my napkin, the fabric rough against my palms. Every word was a stone thrown straight at my ribs, small enough not to leave a mark, but heavy enough to bruise all the same. I said nothing. I did nothing. But inside, I was cataloging every insult, every wound, stacking them up, preparing. Across the table, Shanna set her wineglass down with a flourish and leaned forward, her voice rising slightly above the hum of conversation. "I just feel really blessed, you know?" she said, wide-eyed and falsely humble. "My cosmetics line is doing better than ever. Built it all myself from scratch." Mom beamed at her like she'd announced she cured cancer. Maura clapped lightly, like she was afraid of smudging her nails. I kept my smile frozen, but my heart pounded so loudly in my chest it was a wonder no one heard it. Built it all herself. Scratch. The memories came rushing back, unbidden and viciously clear. Shanna sobbing into the phone at midnight because she couldn't afford her startup loan. The frantic Venmo requests, the whispered promises to pay me back as soon as we're on our feet. Thousands of dollars siphoned off from my savings over years, erased now with one smug, calculated lie. "You're amazing, Shanna," Maura gushed, clutching her arm. "Seriously, some people just talk about success, but you—" She paused dramatically. "You made it happen." My mouth tasted like ash. I reached for my water, my hand steady only because I forced it to be. They were rewriting the story right in front of me, recasting themselves as self-made heroes, casting me as nothing, an extra in their triumphs, a ghost funding dreams that I was now politely asked to forget. I swallowed hard, the room blurring at the edges for a moment. But I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I sat still, the way you do when a snake is coiled at your feet and you know any sudden movement could be fatal. Inside, however, the rage was no longer a firestorm. It was something colder, more precise, a blade honed over years of being bled dry. They didn't want me. They didn't even see me. They only saw what I could give. And now that I had stopped giving, I was nothing but a weight they wanted to cast off. Without me, without what I provided, they would crumble. And some deep, unbreakable part of me no longer cared. Someone tapped a spoon against a glass, and Celeste rose unsteadily to her feet, wineglass in hand. To family, she declared, her voice rich with the kind of practiced emotion that made strangers love her and left me nauseated. Through thick and thin. Everyone raised their glasses dutifully, plastered smiles in place. I reached into the shadowed space beneath the table where my purse rested against my leg. My fingers brushed the smooth edge of the folder hidden inside, the folder I had prepared for this moment, knowing exactly how this night would end. I pulled it closer without drawing attention, the weight of it grounding me in the rising tide of false cheer around me. My smile returned then. But it wasn't for them. It was for me. They wanted a show tonight. Well, they were about to get one. But first, they had one last trick up their sleeves. The laughter around the table faded into a kind of tense expectancy, the way the air changes just before a storm hits. Celeste stood up again, tapping her wine glass with the edge of a fork. The clink echoed unnaturally loud in the thick, sticky air. Everyone turned their attention to her like it was rehearsed. Maybe it was. Celeste smiled, the kind of brittle, icy smile that had once fooled teachers, neighbors, even me when I was young enough to still believe appearances meant something. She lifted her glass higher, her voice syrupy and falsely bright. After many heartfelt discussions, she began, pausing dramatically as if she were delivering a eulogy. We've come to a decision for the good of the family. The "we" was sharp as a knife. I stayed perfectly still, my palms flat on the table, the folder heavy against my thigh under the tablecloth. You see, she continued, her gaze sweeping the room but never once landing on me. Sometimes, hard choices have to be made to preserve the health of a family. I knew what was coming, but it still landed like a punch to the gut when she said it. Rowena, she announced, you are no longer considered part of this family. For a moment, there was a suspended, breathless silence. Then Shanna started clapping, small, polite claps like she was applauding at a high school play. Devin raised his glass in a mock toast, his smirk cutting through the awkwardness. Mara whooped like it was a party and elbowed her husband, who laughed and shook his head. I sat frozen in my seat, not because I hadn't seen it coming, but because somewhere, deep down, a small, foolish part of me had hoped, just maybe, they wouldn't go this far. That there might be some line even they wouldn't cross. Turns out, I had given them too much credit. I turned my head slightly, scanning the faces I once thought would be my lifelines. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. Uncle Dorian offered a little shrug, the universal sign for not my problem. Even Laura, who I'd helped get through college, stared determinedly at her plate. They weren't ashamed. They weren't conflicted. They were relieved. Because this had never been spontaneous. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment outburst. It was a decision, planned, discussed, probably joked about over wine and late-night phone calls. They wanted this. They had wanted this for a long time. Celeste set her glass down carefully and walked over, placing a hand theatrically over her heart. Her voice softened, dripping with false compassion. We're doing this for your own good, Rowena, she said. Maybe now you'll learn to appreciate what real family looks like. The room hummed with a kind of smugness, an unspoken, collective agreement that I had somehow earned this exile. Shanna leaned forward, elbows on the table, fake sympathy radiating from her like cheap perfume. It's not too late to apologize, you know, she said, smiling sweetly. Admit you've been difficult. Maybe we could reconsider. The bait hung there, glistening. They thought they could reel me back in with guilt, with shame, with the desperate, gasping need to belong. But something inside me, something that had been splintering, hardening for years, finally snapped clean. I saw it now. I saw them for what they really were. They didn't want me. They wanted the benefits of me, the convenience of me, the financial support, the silent forgiveness, the reliable scapegoat, and they believed they could still pull my strings if they just yanked hard enough. I let out a breath, slow, steady, almost amused. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping softly against the hardwood floor. Every conversation hushed, every eye locked onto me. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I simply stood up, smoothed the hem of my dress, and reached under the table for my bag. My fingers closed around the folder. Thick, heavy, undeniable. I pulled it out, placed it gently on the table in front of me, and tapped it once with a single, deliberate finger. The sound, barely a whisper, cut through the room louder than any scream. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. Confusion flickered across faces that had, until now, been so smugly certain of the outcome. I smiled then, an actual honest smile. Not the tight, forced grimace I had worn all night, not the polite, strained performance they had expected. A real smile, because the reckoning they had asked for, it was here. And I wasn't just prepared for it. I was ready to deliver it. If they wanted a reckoning, they were about to get every page of it. I placed the folder on the table, and the laughter died instantly. For a moment, there was nothing but the clink of a fork dropped onto a plate, and the low hum of Christmas music still trickling from the stereo in the living room. Eyes turned toward me, first curious, then wary. "Before we move on," I said, my voice smooth and steady, "I brought a little something for all of you." Confused glances passed between them like a virus. Shanna smirked, leaning back in her chair with a smug little nod, clearly assuming I was about to offer some groveling apology, or, better yet, a desperate attempt to buy my way back into their good graces. They thought they knew me so well. Without another word, I slid the folder across the table until it sat directly in the center, daring someone, anyone, to open it. Shanna, naturally, couldn't resist the bait. She reached out with a flick of her manicured fingers, flashing the room a performative eye roll as if to say, "What now?" Her smirk widened as she flipped open the cover. The smile didn't survive the first page. Her face stiffened. Color drained from her cheeks. Her hand, so casual just seconds ago, now trembled slightly as she flipped to the next page. And the next. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I sat back, folding my hands neatly in my lap, watching the collapse happen in real time. Bank transfers, payment receipts, screenshots of text messages begging for help at all hours of the night, Venmo records, emails with urgent subject lines like, "Just this once, and I promise I'll pay you back." Every favor, every emergency, every dime, all documented, all undeniable. Shanna slammed the folder shut like it had burned her. Maura leaned over, her eyes narrowing as she skimmed the top few pages. She gasped aloud, her hand flying to her mouth as if trying to physically push the evidence back inside. Devin muttered something ugly under his breath, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Uncle Dorian stiffened visibly when he caught sight of a line item noting the loan he had quietly siphoned from a family trust, money that had conveniently never been mentioned again. Celeste was slower to react. She picked up the folder with trembling fingers, flipping through it in silence, her lips pressed into a bloodless line. "This is twisted," she said finally, her voice brittle, fake outrage already bubbling up. "You're making it look worse than it was." I tilted my head slightly, offering her the faintest smile. "I didn't write anything that wasn't true," I said calmly. "I just collected what you so freely gave." A ripple of tension skittered through the room. No one spoke. No one defended her. They didn't dare, because they knew. They had always known. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to accuse. The truth was louder than any of their lies. As I watched them squirm, Shanna frantically smoothing her hair, Maura darting glances around for someone to blame, Devin gripping the edge of the table like it might collapse under the weight of the evidence, I felt nothing. No pity, no regret, no longing to fix what had long ago shattered beyond repair. For once, I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to justify my anger or soften my truth to protect their fragile egos. The carefully curated family image they had spent years polishing was cracking apart, piece by piece, with no way to tape it back together. Celeste shoved the folder back across the table toward me, like she could physically reject what it contained. "You're bitter," she hissed. "You're trying to destroy this family." I leaned in slightly, letting my words land softly, lethally. "This family destroyed itself," I said. "I just finally stopped cleaning up the mess." They stared at me, stunned into silence. Not a single apology, not a single acknowledgement. Just the same old reflex, to paint me as the villain when their own ugliness was exposed to daylight. I stood up slowly, gathering my bag. "This," I said, nodding toward the folder, "is my gift to you." Their faces flickered with confusion, anger, shame. "Everything you've ever taken," I continued, "all laid out in black and white. No excuses, no edits, just the truth." The silence that followed was suffocating, thick enough to drown in, heavy enough to crush the last fragile pretenses they clung to, and still, no one moved to stop me. Good, because if they thought that was the worst part, they hadn't seen anything yet. The second half of the folder hit even harder, as the first few pages had landed like stones tossed into a quiet pond. These were like grenades, each one blowing open another lie, another betrayal, another debt they thought would stay buried. Around the table, hands flipped through the documents faster now. Pages crinkled and slid against each other as panic set in. Faces turned red, voices dropped to sharp whispers, a chorus of frantic denials crackling under the surface. Every detail was there, as methodical as an autopsy report. Payments Shanna had begged for after each of her business setbacks. Written checks, PayPal receipts, wire transfers marked with desperate subject lines like urgent and bridge loan. Maura's late rent notices from her shabby apartment 3 towns over, cleared by my savings account while she took vacations she claimed she deserved. Uncle Dorian's so-called emergency medical loans, which the bank statements showed had suspiciously coincided with a suspicious new boat purchase. Each page was time-stamped, cross-referenced with bank confirmations, emails, and texts. There was no ambiguity left, no plausible deniability. And through it all, I sat there, motionless, calm, centered. The eye of the storm, while the house I had once desperately tried to hold together splintered apart. Devin tried to laugh it off at first, a shaky, unnatural sound that died in his throat the moment he spotted a document near the back of the pile. His hand shot out, but he wasn't fast enough. Shanna already had it. She stared at the page, confusion folding into horror, then into something much darker. Large cash withdrawals, thousands at a time, from ATMs connected to local casinos. Text messages from Devin to me, frantically begging for help covering an emergency. When the truth was, he'd gambled away rent money, car payments, even holiday funds. You liar! Shanna shrieked, standing so abruptly her chair toppled over behind her. She hurled her wine glass at the floor. It shattered into jagged pieces, the sound slicing through the thick tension. Devin threw his hands up, a wild, desperate laugh escaping him. "Oh, don't act so high and mighty, Shanna," he barked. "You've been milking her for years. Who bailed you out when your little makeup empire tanked, or did you forget? You stole from all of us," Maura spat, rounding on Devin now. "You lied to our faces." "Oh, spare me," Devin snapped. "You and Dorian aren't any better." Uncle Dorian pushed back his chair so violently it screeched across the floor. His face was mottled red as he jabbed a finger at Devin. "I only took what I deserved," he roared. "After everything this family put me through, that trust was practically owed to me." The arguments exploded from there, ricocheting around the room like bullets. Shanna screaming, Devin cursing, Maura wailing about betrayal, Dorian ranting about entitlement. No one was on the same side anymore. The alliances cracked. The carefully choreographed performance of unity shredded itself apart in real time. And I watched, detached, distant, silent, like someone standing outside, listening to a house collapse in on itself. This family had spent years taking from me, time, energy, forgiveness, money, and tonight, finally, they were devouring each other instead of me. I leaned back slightly, letting the chaos swirl around me. My hand slipped into my bag again, fingers brushing the second envelope I'd prepared. Thicker than the first, heavier, final. I pulled it out slowly, unseen by anyone too busy screaming accusations across the mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce. I glanced at the clock over the mantel, right on schedule. They were too consumed by their own unraveling to notice me anymore, too blinded by self-preservation to see what was still coming. They thought the worst had passed. They had no idea. The final blow was coming, and it would leave no doubts about where I stood. I slid the second envelope across the table, and the room went silent. It thudded against the wood with a heavy finality, a sound that seemed to reverberate louder than all the accusations still hanging thick in the air. Devin, desperate to regain control, lunged for it like a drowning man reaching for a rope. He tore it open without ceremony, the paper ripping in his frantic hands. His eyes scanned the first page, and in his panic, he made the worst mistake of all. Instead of defending himself, he turned on the only ally he thought he had left. "You want secrets," he sneered, his voice cracking under pressure. "Let's start with Shanna." A low murmur rippled across the room as Devin brandished a printout from the envelope, an email chain that dripped with venom. Private emails between Shanna and one of her so-called friends, where she mocked her own family for being pathetic leeches, bragging about how easy it was to play the long game and bleed the suckers dry. And if that wasn't enough, the next document was worse. Bank statements showing transfers from a joint family emergency fund, supposedly reserved for dire situations, funneled straight into Shanna's accounts, funding spa weekends, designer bags, and luxury trips to Miami under the guise of business retreats. Shanna's jaw dropped. She looked around wildly, as if she could somehow deny what was now printed in black and white. You're ruining everything!" she shrieked at Devin, knocking over her chair as she lunged at him across the table. Devin stumbled back, knocking into Mora, who yelped as her wine splashed across her sweater. "You did this to yourself," Devin spat back. "Don't look at me like you're innocent." The scene devolved into chaos. Shanna screeched. Devin bellowed. Mora cursed. Voices overlapped, accusations flying so thick it was impossible to tell who was shouting what. And amid the storm, another truth surfaced. Folded deeper within the envelope were the legal documents I'd tucked away, waiting for this exact moment. Celeste, face already pale with shock, pulled out the notarized paperwork, proof that Uncle Dorian had manipulated her, years ago, into altering parts of the family trust to funnel a hefty sum directly into his name. The trust meant to protect everyone had been gutted under their noses. Celeste stumbled back into her chair as if the betrayal had knocked the air from her lungs. "You lied," she whispered, looking at Dorian with a betrayal so raw it was almost painful to watch. "You said it was for the family, for all of us." Dorian shrugged, his bravado cracking. "Times were hard. I did what I had to do." Wallace, who had been practically comatose all evening, finally found his voice. "You stole from your own blood," he said hoarsely, shaking his head like he was trying to rattle the disbelief free. But it was too little, too late. The house of cards didn't just collapse, it exploded. Everyone was shouting now, not even bothering to mask the ugliness anymore. Mora screamed that she wanted her money back. Shanna howled that Devin had set her up. Devin barked that Dorian was the real snake. And me? I stood up slowly, watching them tear each other to shreds, feeling absolutely nothing. No triumph, no sadness, only a cold, clean finality. They had made me the villain long before tonight. They had decided I was expendable, that I could be used and discarded. All I had done was show them the monsters they had always been, and they had destroyed themselves trying to deny it. As I reached for my coat and bag, Shanna turned her rage onto me. "You planned this!" she shrieked, tears of anger streaking down her face. "You set us up! You're sick!" I met her glare with a calmness that only seemed to enrage her more. "No," I said quietly, adjusting my coat. "You planned this when you decided I wasn't family anymore. I'm just finishing what you started." The words hung in the air, heavy and immovable. I took one last look around the room, at the wreckage, the shattered illusions, the raw wounds, and felt lighter than I had in years. They thought cutting me out would destroy me. They thought abandoning me would leave me desperate to crawl back. But they were wrong. They had set me free. And if freedom came with a price, well, I'd been paying their debts long enough. It was time to start investing in myself. I pushed open the front door and stepped into the cold night, the sounds of their bickering fading behind me. But freedom always comes with a price, and I was ready to pay it. I stepped outside into the icy night air, my breath sharp, my hands steady. The chaos I left behind still echoed faintly through the closed door, but it no longer touched me. The weight that had anchored me to them for so long, the obligation, the guilt, the invisible chains, had finally snapped. Pulling my coat tighter around me, I walked toward my car. Every step felt lighter, every breath cleaner. The second envelope tucked safely inside my bag was heavier in its own way. Not with regret, but with certainty. I spent that night preparing the final severance. At my kitchen table, under the soft golden light of a single lamp, I opened the smaller envelope. One by one, I laid out the documents. The paperwork revoking my status as medical proxy, terminating financial obligations, severing any lingering emergency contacts. Each signature, each notarized stamp, felt like a stitch pulling closed an old wound. And then there was the letter. It was short, precise, devoid of rage, dripping with resolve. This is not an act of anger. It is an act of survival. I placed everything carefully into a large manila envelope. The next morning, as the sun barely lifted itself over the frost-covered rooftops, I drove to the post office. No hesitations, no second thoughts. The clerk weighed the package, slapped on the postage, and slid it into the outgoing bin. Just like that, it was done. No goodbye, no drama. No performance for an audience that never deserved one. In the following days, silence reigned. A clean, almost jarring quiet filled my small apartment. At first, it felt unnatural, like waiting for a storm that never came. I checked my phone out of habit, but there were no new messages, no voicemails. Until they realized what I'd done. The first text came 3 days later. "Mom, we were angry. We said things we didn't mean. You're still family." Then another from Maura. "Don't let one bad night erase everything." Then, one voicemail after another. Celeste sobbing, saying they could work it out, that family fights, but family forgives. It was all so predictable, so sad. The real blow came when I found the handwritten letter in my mailbox, penned in the shaky cursive I'd known since childhood. It smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender and guilt. "Rowena, we made mistakes. We said hurtful things. But please don't abandon us. Your father misses you. Ellie keeps asking about you. I don't know how to fix this. Please call me. Love, Mom." I sat at my kitchen table, holding the letter loosely between my fingers. For a long while, I just stared at it, letting the familiar ache wash over me. They hadn't changed. They hadn't understood. They still thought love was a transaction, a tug of war between guilt and duty. Setting the letter down without ceremony, I didn't bother crafting a reply. They didn't deserve one. This time, my silence was the answer. Christmas came. I spent it alone. Not in the miserable, tragic sense they had always warned me about, the "you'll be so lonely if you don't fall in line" fear they weaponized against me. I bought myself a small, artificial tree, decorated it with lights that twinkled like tiny stars. I wrapped a single present for myself, a framed photo of Duke, my golden retriever, smiling with his tongue lolling out in pure, joyful abandon. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and pine, warm and inviting. I lit a candle. I poured a glass of wine. I curled up with Duke on the couch and pulled a soft blanket over us both. For the first time in years, I didn't have to brace for the next demand, the next emotional grenade. No frantic calls, no guilt-laced emergencies, just quiet, just peace. As the snow fell silently outside my window, blanketing the world in fresh, unmarked white, I realized something profound. Love isn't something you earn through sacrifice. It isn't something you buy with silence or loyalty. It's offered freely, or it isn't love at all. They had never loved me. Not really. They loved what I gave them. And when I stopped giving, they tried to redefine me as cruel, broken, unworthy. But they were wrong. I stood at the window, watching the world beyond my apartment shimmer under the streetlights. I pressed my hand lightly to the glass, feeling the cold radiate against my palm. I wasn't broken. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't alone. I was free. The final image burned into my mind. Not their faces twisted in anger, not their voices begging for another chance. No. The final image was this: me, wrapped in peace, wrapped in truth, wrapped in the kind of love that expects nothing and demands even less. The real gift wasn't the folder or the revenge, it was the freedom to finally live. I thought the silence would be the end of it. But silence has its own stories to tell. It fills the spaces left behind by chaos, magnifying everything you thought you'd buried. Some nights it was a comfort, wrapping me in peace. Other nights, it whispered reminders of things unfinished, things unsaid. Weeks slid by like snowmelt down a quiet mountain road. The calendar turned its pages without ceremony, pulling me farther and farther from that house, that table, that moment when I finally chose myself. And then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a number I recognized, just a message. A photo. Ellie. Her small hands clutching a brightly colored piece of construction paper, glitter smeared across the edges in wild, childlike bursts, scrawled in purple crayon, simple and raw. "I miss you, Aunt Rowena." I pressed the phone to my chest, eyes burning against my will. No manipulations, no hidden barbs. Just a child who didn't choose any of this. A child caught in a war she never started. The temptation to respond was fierce, primal even. To pick up the phone, to bridge the gap the adults had torn wide open. To explain it wasn't her fault, that none of this was about her. But I didn't. Not because I didn't care, because I did. Loving her meant not dragging her back into a battlefield. It meant not letting them use her innocence as a weapon against me. It meant letting her remember me kindly instead of teaching her the bitterness that defined the others. I whispered into the silence of my apartment, "I miss you too, sweet girl." And then, carefully, I set the phone face down on the table and turned away. News of the family's unraveling reached me in fragments, mostly from acquaintances who had no idea how deep the wounds went. Shauna's boutique, the one she had crowed about endlessly, closed its doors 6 weeks after the Christmas dinner debacle. Word got out about financial irregularities, whispered in grocery store aisles and church vestibules. Devin, ever the gambler, filed for bankruptcy. His wife left him. A custody battle erupted, ugly in public, stretching like a slow-motion car crash through every court docket in Boulder. Uncle Dorian wasn't so lucky. His inheritance scam came to light when one of the older relatives dug through old paperwork. Lawsuits followed, some civil, some criminal. Celeste and Wallace, they didn't go to jail, but their perfect family reputation shattered like spun glass. Former friends crossed the street to avoid them. Invitations dried up. The phone stopped ringing. I hadn't lifted a single finger to cause any of it. They had built their castles on sand. I had simply stepped back and let the tide roll in. There was no triumph in hearing about their downfall, no glee, just a clean, almost clinical sense of closure. Like setting down a burden I didn't even realize I was still carrying. In early spring, I moved to Denver. New apartment, new routine, new air that didn't carry the ghosts of betrayal in every breath. I enrolled in a painting class at a community center, even though my artistic skills hovered somewhere between enthusiastic toddler and accidental abstract. It wasn't about being good. It was about creating something messy and real and mine. On weekends, I hiked the trails that braided themselves along the Front Range, feeling the ground steady beneath my boots, the thin air sharpening my senses. I reached out to old friends, people I'd lost touch with during the years I spent orbiting the black hole of my family's demands. Some doors were still open. Others had quietly closed. I honored both with gratitude. I thought of Ellie sometimes, her gap-toothed smile, her sticky hugs, but I didn't let myself wallow in it. You can love someone and still choose yourself, I reminded myself on the lonelier nights. Some scars stay tender longer than others. One evening, after a light snow dusted the city in glittering white, I found myself standing on a ridge overlooking Denver's sprawling lights. The world below buzzed with life, tiny, oblivious stories unfolding in warm homes and bright offices. And here I was, separate but whole, a thread no longer tangled in anyone else's fabric. The scars were still there. They always would be. The ache of betrayal, the ghost of Ellie's tiny hand in mine, the memories of laughter that had once been real, before it turned hollow. But scars are not chains. They are proof of survival, proof that you were wounded, and you healed in your own way. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling the cold bite at my skin, and smiled. A small, quiet smile meant for no one but me. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't a neat, tied-up bow of forgiveness and reunions. It was better. It was freedom. It was peace. It was mine. This isn't a happily ever after. This is something stronger. This is mine. Sometimes walking away isn't about anger. It's about survival. In the end, true family isn't built on guilt or obligation. It's built on love, respect, and choice. What would you choose if the cost of staying was your own peace? If this story moved you and you love real family drama with heart and healing, don't forget to subscribe for more. Your journey matters, and you're never alone here.